Ardent Prime was burning. The sky, once a beautiful shade of deep blue, was now painted with the fire and smoke of a battle that had already been lost. The streets were filled with panicked civilians, running for shelter that no longer existed. Buildings collapsed under the relentless bombardment from above, their foundations crumbling like sandcastles against the tide. The galactic dominion had come in full force, and humanity's last colony beyond Earth's system was now nothing more than a dying ember in the void. Sergeant Alan Pierce crouched behind the remains of a broken transport vehicle, his pulse rifle clutched tightly in his hands. His armor was scorched, cracked in places from near misses, but he was still breathing. Around him, the few surviving soldiers of the colony's defense force held their ground, waiting for the next wave of Dominion troops to push forward. The alien invaders were relentless, their insectoid forms moving with terrifying precision. Their weapons, sleek and deadly, sent energy bolts screaming through the air, cutting down anyone caught in the open. Pierce gritted his teeth, watching as one of his men, a young private barely out of training, tried to move to a better position. The moment he left cover, a blast took him square in the chest, sending him tumbling lifelessly to the ground. Pierce forced himself to look away. There was no time to mourn. A voice crackled through his earpiece, barely audible over the chaos. "Command center is down. We're cut off. No more reinforcements." Pierce already knew that. He had known it from the moment the Dominion fleet had arrived in orbit, darkening the sky with their massive warships. Humanity had fought bravely, but this battle had been decided before it even began. The Dominion had come prepared, and they had struck with overwhelming force. The colony's defenses had lasted longer than expected, but in the end, they had fallen like every other world the Dominion had conquered. He glanced at the sky, his heart sinking as he saw the massive alien vessels still looming above. Every few seconds, another bolt of plasma would arc downwards, obliterating entire city blocks in an instant. This wasn't just an invasion. This was extermination. A new sound cut through the noise of battle. The deep, rumbling footsteps of something massive. Pierce turned his head and felt a fresh wave of dread wash over him. War machines. The Dominion had deployed their heavy walkers, towering constructs of metal and death that moved like giants among insects. Their legs crushed everything beneath them, and their weapons incinerated anything in their path. The soldiers around him knew what this meant. There was no stopping them. There was no fighting back. "Fall back," someone shouted. "Get to the evacuation zones." But the words were empty. Everyone knew there were no real evacuation zones left. The spaceports had been destroyed within the first hour of the attack. The few remaining ships that had tried to flee had been shot down before they could even breach the atmosphere. The Dominion wasn't leaving survivors. Still, the instinct to run was too strong. The soldiers broke into a sprint, dodging falling debris and weaving through the ruined city. Pierce moved with them, his heart pounding. He had fought in wars before, had faced death too many times to count. But this was different. This wasn't just a battle. This was the end of a world. Somewhere in the distance, a child was crying. A woman screamed for help. The sounds of desperation and terror filled the air. But Pierce knew he couldn't stop. The only thing he could do now was keep moving, keep fighting, until there was no fight left in him. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves face to face with a Dominion squad. The aliens reacted instantly, raising their weapons. Pierce dove for cover as the first shots rang out, his men doing the same. The air was filled with burning energy as both sides exchanged fire. A Dominion soldier took a hit to the head and collapsed, black blood spraying against the wall behind it. Another lunged forward, only to be cut down by a burst from Pierce's rifle. But for every enemy they took down, more arrived. The Dominion never fought fair. They overwhelmed, they suffocated, they erased their enemies with sheer numbers. One by one, Pierce's men fell. Some were shot, others were caught in explosions that tore through the street. It happened so fast, too fast. And then he was alone. His breathing was ragged, his ammo running low. He pressed his back against a broken pillar, listening to the alien voices around him. They were speaking in their strange, chittering language, but he didn't need to understand them to know what they were saying. Hunt him. Kill him. Move forward. The humans are finished. He wiped the sweat and grime from his face, gripping his rifle tighter. He wouldn't surrender. He would never surrender. If he was going to die, he was going to take as many of them with him as he could. Before he could move, a new sound filled his earpiece. A faint, static-laced voice. Arden Prime has fallen. This is our final message. Earth, if you hear this, remember us. The distress signal. The last message of a dying world. The Dominion soldiers had heard it too. They laughed, a strange, inhuman sound, as if mocking humanity's last, desperate attempt to cry for help. Pierce closed his eyes for a moment. Then he took a deep breath and stepped out of cover, firing his last rounds at the monsters who had destroyed his home. Above, the Dominion fleet watched the final moments of the battle, confident in their victory. Earth would never come. They were wrong. The fires of Arden Prime still rage, casting an eerie glow into the blackness of space, where the Galactic Dominion's fleet hung in silent triumph. The last resistance had been crushed. The final distress call had gone out. And now, only the echoes of destruction remained. Lord Zyros stood aboard the command bridge of his massive warship, gazing down at the broken world beneath him. To him, this was nothing more than another conquest, another species brought to its knees beneath the might of the Dominion. Humanity had fought harder than expected, but in the end, they had been nothing more than an inconvenience. Their soldiers had been brave, their weapons effective, but they lacked the numbers, the technology, the sheer power needed to stand against the Dominion's forces. It was a lesson repeated across the stars. Lesser civilizations were doomed to fall, and only the strong would rule. Kairos allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before turning his attention to the final reports. The planetary defenses had been annihilated, the remaining human forces were being hunted down, and the last civilian shelters were being cleared. Soon, Arden Prime would be nothing but a lifeless husk, a warning to any species foolish enough to resist. As he prepared to transmit his victory declaration to the Dominion High Council, an officer approached, his insectoid features betraying a hint of unease. "My lord," the officer began, his mandibles clicking in uncertainty, "we intercepted a human distress signal before their final base was destroyed. It was sent in the direction of their homeworld." Kairos tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "And?" The officer hesitated. "Should we be concerned? They may attempt retaliation." At that, Zyros let out a short, sharp laugh. Retaliation. The very thought was absurd. Earth had been isolated for decades, its fleet weak, its influence in the galaxy practically non-existent. When the Dominion had first begun its campaign against humanity, Earth had barely mounted a response. They had pulled back, sacrificing outer colonies one by one, until only Arden Prime remained. And now, with this last stronghold reduced to rubble, humanity was finished. Let them hear it. Hyros said dismissively. Let them grieve. Let them rage. It will not change their fate. They are weak. They will hide, just as they always have. The officer nodded, but his unease did not fade. Reports had surfaced in recent months. Whispers of human movements in deep space, strange energy signatures on the outskirts of Dominion-controlled sectors, ghost signals that vanished before they could be traced. It was nothing concrete, nothing the Dominion had considered a threat, but something about it made him uncomfortable. Kairos, however, was unmoved. He had seen enough wars to know the truth. When a species suffered a defeat like this, they did not rise again. They surrendered, they submitted, or they simply faded into nothing. He turned his attention back to the battle map, where the burning remains of Arden Prime flickered like a dying ember. This war was over. Humanity was over. And yet, deep in the void, far beyond the reach of Dominion scanners, something stirred. A ripple in the darkness. A signal that was not a distress call, but a summons. Hidden within the cold depths of space, behind the asteroid fields and lifeless moons where no one dared to look, they were waiting. The ships that had never been seen. The weapons that had never been tested in battle. The fleet that had never been acknowledged. And when the time was right, when the enemy had celebrated for too long, when the Dominion was certain of their victory, Earth's response would come. Not with sorrow, not with fear, but with vengeance. The Galactic Dominion reveled in its victory, spreading news of humanity's downfall across the stars. Every species that had once harbored hope of resisting the Dominion now knew the truth. If the humans, with all their stubborn defiance, had fallen, then no one else stood a chance. The message was clear. There was no escaping the Dominion's rule. Lord Zyros took pleasure in this knowledge, watching as fear gripped the lesser civilizations. Trade routes opened wider, tribute flowed in larger quantities, and rebellious factions fell silent. Yet, despite his triumph, there was a lingering tension in the air, a whisper of unease that his officers hesitated to voice. Strange anomalies had begun appearing in Dominion-controlled space, ghost readings of enormous mass signatures that disappeared before they could be investigated, long-range sensors detecting distortions that didn't match any known celestial body. Reports from the outermost sectors spoke of shipyards that no one could confirm existed, of colonies that had supposedly been abandoned but were still drawing vast amounts of energy from unknown sources. Zyros dismissed these as paranoia, remnants of the human war machine sputtering in its death throes. After all, Earth had done nothing. No fleet had arrived to save Ardent Prime. No reinforcements had fought back. As far as the Dominion was concerned, humanity had already accepted its fate. But in the cold silence of deep space, where no Dominion ship dared to venture, they were gathering. The humans had been watching, waiting, building in secret. Earth had not wasted its time trying to defend its doomed colonies or sending fleets to die in battles they could not win. Instead, they had been preparing for the one battle that truly mattered. Beyond the reach of Dominion eyes, in the shadow of dead worlds and hidden strongholds, they had forged something new. Warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, vessels designed not for skirmishes or border defense, but for absolute dominance. These were not mere cruisers or battleships. These were dreadnoughts, the kind of ships that could turn entire fleets to dust, the kind of weapons that were never meant to be used unless humanity's survival depended on it. And now, that moment had arrived. As the Dominion celebrated its victory, as Kairos and his fleet basked in their supposed conquest, the order was finally given. Across hidden bases and silent shipyards, massive engines roared to life, lighting up the darkness like stars being born. The dreadnoughts moved. The void trembled as they emerged from their hiding places, their hulls black as the abyss, their weapons charged with power beyond imagination. And as they began their approach, cutting through space with terrifying purpose, one thing became certain: the war was not over. The real war had only just begun. The Dominion fleet patrolled the ruins of Ardent Prime, its commander's content, its soldiers relaxed. The battle had been won, the enemy crushed, and no retaliation had come. Lord Zyros, seated in the command throne of his massive warship, gazed at the scattered remains of human resistance on the planet's surface, feeling nothing but satisfaction. The once thriving colony was now a wasteland, its cities turned to rubble, its people either dead or hunted down like vermin. The final reports had come in. No human survivors remained, and no distress signals had been answered. To Zyros, that was the final proof of Earth's weakness. If humanity had any real power left, if they had even a fraction of the strength required to stand against the Dominion, they would have shown themselves by now. But they hadn't. They had done nothing. And so, the Dominion believed the war was over. They believed humanity had been broken. They believed Earth had surrendered without ever firing a shot. But in the void beyond their scanners, beyond the reach of their arrogance, something moved. It began as a whisper in the depths of space, a faint, immeasurable distortion, something so subtle that Dominion sensors dismissed it as background noise. Then came the gravitational anomalies, tiny fluctuations that suggested something enormous was approaching. By the time the first sensor arrays picked up the truth, it was already too late. A tremor rippled through the Dominion fleet as space itself seemed to bend. And then, like shadows emerging from the abyss, they arrived. The human dreadnoughts did not enter the system with the usual warning flashes of FTL transitions. They did not appear with bright energy signatures or desperate, scrambling formations. They descended upon the Dominion like wraiths, dark and silent, gliding into position with terrifying precision. There were only a dozen of them, but each one dwarfed even the largest Dominion warships. Their hulls, matte black and lined with armor that shimmered against the light, or no insignia, no markings, only the unbroken silence of death approaching. Their weapons, unseen and uncharged for now, pulsed with restrained energy, as if waiting for the command to unleash hell. On the bridge of his flagship, Lord Zyros stared at the impossible sight before him, his mandibles twitching in disbelief. This was not the fleet of a defeated species. This was something else, something monstrous. The silence was suffocating, the weight of unseen power pressing down on the Dominion fleet like an unspoken threat. The dreadnoughts did not hail them. They did not send demands. They simply existed, their presence alone enough to set every Dominion officer on edge. Zyros forced himself to regain control, slamming his clawed hand against the command panel. "Open fire," he roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and fear. "Destroy them. Now." The Dominion warships obeyed, their cannons lighting up the void, a storm of plasma and energy lancing toward the intruders. And that was when humanity finally spoke back. The dreadnoughts reacted as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. Their shields did not flicker. Their hulls did not burn. Instead, they answered. From the depths of their war-forged bodies, their weapons came to life, and for the first time in history, the Dominion learned what fear truly meant. The humans had not come for negotiation. They had not come for diplomacy. They had come to end the war in a single night. The first shot from the human dreadnoughts did not come as a blinding flash or an overcharged energy blast. It came as a whisper in the void, a ripple in space itself, followed by annihilation. A Dominion battleship, one of the largest in the fleet, simply ceased to exist in the blink of an eye. One moment it was there, weapons primed, shields at full strength. Then, in a silent instant, it was nothing but drifting debris, its central hull sheared apart by a force beyond anything the Dominion had ever encountered. Panic spread through the alien fleet as officers scrambled to understand what had just happened. The sensors had detected no conventional weapon discharge, no missile, no beam of energy. The ship had simply been torn apart, like paper against a blade too fast to see. But there was no time to process. The dreadnoughts had already moved. Without hesitation, the human warships advanced, gliding through the battlefield with eerie, calculated precision. Their weapons systems, now fully awakened, tore through the Dominion's fleet with cold efficiency. Pulse cannons that shattered shields in a single impact. Railguns that launched tungsten slugs at near-light speeds, punching holes clean through warships as if they were made of glass. Experimental gravimetric weapons that crushed ships from the inside, imploding them into unrecognizable wreckage. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter. The Dominion fleet, so used to being the superior force, so accustomed to fighting lesser civilizations that could never truly challenge them, now found itself running. Frigates scrambled to reposition, cruisers tried to retreat, and the mighty warships of the Dominion opened fire with everything they had. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered. The dreadnoughts did not fight like any fleet Zyros had ever faced. They did not move with the erratic, desperate motions of an outmatched force. They advanced like predators in the dark, precise and unyielding, cutting through the Dominion like a blade through flesh. One shot, one kill. Every blast from the Dominion's weapons was met with silence, not because the shots missed, but because they did nothing. Their shields absorbed the attacks like they were nothing more than raindrops against steel. Their armor, reinforced beyond anything the Dominion had seen before, shrugged off damage that should have melted through entire decks. And worst of all, the humans did not speak. There were no warnings, no threats, no demands for surrender. Only destruction. Thyros could feel the fear spreading through his fleet like a plague. His officers, once so confident, were now shouting over one another in panic, their composure shattered. He could see the Dominion warships being torn apart one by one, their captains begging for orders, for reinforcements that would never come. His empire had never known defeat. Not like this. Not this fast. Not this brutal. And then, for the first time since the battle began, a human transmission cut through the silence. The voice that came through was cold, devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of an executioner's final sentence. You thought we were finished. Cyrus's blood ran cold. You thought we were weak. Another Dominion battleship exploded, its core detonating in a brilliant fireball. You were wrong. And as the flagship trembled under the impact of the first direct hit against its hull, Thyros realized the truth. The humans had never been defeated. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, that moment had come. The battlefield was no longer a war zone. It was a graveyard. Dominion ships, once symbols of terror and absolute power, now drifted as shattered wrecks, their remains scattered across the void like the broken bones of a dying empire. Fires flickered in the darkness, oxygen bleeding from ruptured hulls, the lifeless bodies of Dominion soldiers floating amidst the debris. The humans had not come for mercy. They had not come to negotiate, nor to reclaim lost ground. They had come for vengeance, and vengeance was being delivered with terrifying precision. Lord Zyros stood frozen on the bridge of his flagship, his mind refusing to process what was happening. His fleet, his invincible fleet, was being systematically erased. Every strategy he had ever used, every overwhelming force the Dominion had relied on for centuries, had been rendered useless in the face of these monstrous human dreadnoughts. This was not the same species the Dominion had fought before. These were not the desperate, scattered defenders of Ardent Prime. These were hunters, warforged in the fires of their own near extinction, their technology refined in the darkness beyond the Dominion's reach. Kairos had believed the war was over the moment Ardent Prime fell, that humanity had been broken beyond repair. But he had not seen what lay in the shadows. He had not understood what Earth had become. The Dominion's greatest mistake had not been their invasion. It had not been the destruction of human colonies, nor the slaughter of their people. No, their greatest mistake had been giving humanity time to prepare. The Dreadnoughts moved in coordinated silence, targeting the Dominion fleet's command structure with surgical brutality. Every ship that attempted to retreat was hunted down, their engines disabled before they were torn apart by railgun fire. Those that held their ground fared no better. Their weapons meant nothing against the sheer power of the human fleet. Even the Dominion's most advanced warships, the pride of their empire, were helpless. Their energy shields, once thought impenetrable, failed in mere seconds under the sustained fire of human weaponry. Their armor, forged from the strongest alloys known to the Dominion, crumpled like paper beneath the relentless barrage. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Zyros's claws dug into the metal of his command console, his mandibles clicking erratically as his officers screamed around him, begging for orders that no longer mattered. His mind raced for a solution, for anything that could turn the tide. But there was nothing. The humans had outmaneuvered them, outgunned them, outthought them, and they were not stopping. A deep, dreadful realization settled into his chest. The Dominion had always assumed itself to be the apex predator of the galaxy. It had never once considered the possibility that something worse existed. But now, staring at the human dreadnoughts as they carved through his fleet with cold, calculated efficiency, Tyros knew the truth. Humanity had become something far more terrifying than prey. They had become the monsters the Dominion had always feared. And now, they had come to end the war for good. The Dominion fleet was no more. What had once been an armada of terror, a force that had crushed entire civilizations beneath its might, was now nothing but drifting wreckage. Fires still burned in the remains of shattered warships, casting a dim, flickering light across the battlefield. A battlefield that was no longer a fight, but a massacre. The last Dominion vessels had tried to flee, their captains abandoning their pride in a desperate bid for survival. But it had made no difference. The human dreadnoughts hunted them down, one by one, like predators culling the weak. No one escaped. Not this time. Not after what the Dominion had done. Lord Zyros stood on the collapsing bridge of his flagship, his mind fractured, his body trembling. He had witnessed the destruction of entire species before. He had ordered the extermination of planets, the enslavement of billions. He had watched as world after world fell to the might of the Dominion. Never had he thought, even for a second, that his own kind could suffer the same fate. But now, as he stared out into the void, surrounded by the burning remains of his once invincible fleet, he understood what true fear felt like. Humanity had not just survived. They had evolved. They had spent years hiding in the dark, not out of cowardice, but to prepare for this moment. The dreadnoughts had not been built to defend colonies or protect fragile borders. They had been forged with one purpose: to end the war in a single devastating strike. And that was exactly what they had done. The humans had not wasted time with diplomacy. They had not offered surrender terms. They had not spared a single Dominion warship, because the Dominion had never spared them. This was not justice. This was retribution. A cold voice crackled over the ship's failing comms, breaking the eerie silence. The same human voice that had spoken before, devoid of anger or mercy, as if delivering a sentence already decided. Your empire thought itself untouchable. Xyros's claws twitched as the reality of his situation settled in. His flagship, the proudest vessel of the Dominion's fleet, was surrounded. The dreadnoughts had formed a silent ring around him, their weapons charged, their presence an unspoken promise of annihilation. You thought we were weak. His vision blurred as he staggered forward, the control panel flickering with warnings of imminent failure. His empire had never considered humanity a true threat. He had never considered humanity a true threat. He had been wrong. So very, very wrong. You burned our worlds. A distant explosion rocked the ship. The last of his warships had been destroyed. Zyros felt something cold settle in his chest, an emotion he had inflicted upon countless species before. Hopelessness. Now we burn yours. And then the dreadnoughts fired. The void itself seemed to shatter as the human dreadnoughts unleashed their final barrage, their weapons cutting through the Dominion flagship like a blade through brittle glass. Lord Zyros barely had time to process it. One moment, his ship stood as the last remnant of his once glorious fleet, and the next, it was being torn apart from the inside out. The shields, once thought impenetrable, collapsed instantly under the relentless fire. The reinforced hull crumpled as if it were nothing more than fragile metal, molten debris spiraling into the cold abyss. Explosions erupted across every deck, the ship's core breaching in a chain reaction of destruction. Flames and shattered metal engulfed the bridge as alarms screamed in a cacophony of finality. Zyros fell to his knees, his vision blurring, his mind unable to comprehend how swiftly it had all ended. His empire, his unstoppable dominion, had been reduced to nothing in mere hours. The power they had wielded for centuries, the fear they had instilled across the stars, all of it had meant nothing in the face of humanity's vengeance. And the humans, they had never spoken of surrender. They had never given the Dominion a chance to beg for mercy, because the Dominion had never shown mercy to them. Zyros coughed, the acrid smoke filling his lungs as cracks splintered across the viewport, the vacuum of space clawing at the edges. Through the shattered glass, he saw them, the monsters humanity had become. The dreadnoughts hovered like silent reapers, their black hulls reflecting the fiery destruction of his own fleet, their weapons already shifting to the next target. They weren't finished. This was not just a battle. This was an extinction. The Dominion had believed itself to be eternal. They had conquered hundreds of worlds, wiped out entire species, never fearing retaliation. But they had made a mistake that could never be undone. They had pushed humanity too far. And now, for the first time, the Dominion was the one facing extinction. Zairo's breath hitched as